Welcome to today's 5 Good Minutes.
Today we will be considering the week of Christmas with Kurt Bjorklund.
Psalm 112 speaks about the blessing that God brings, but it also speaks about fear. Verse 7, he's not afraid of bad news. So what are fears that you have as we start a new year? There's probably some fear around family issues. Verse 2, we see this idea of his offspring. There's probably some financial fears. Verse 3, there's probably some fear of darkness in our world. Verse 4, fear of future and change. Talking about the righteous will never be moved, but will be remembered forever. And then the fear of bad news. Verse 7. And the idea probably in Psalm 112 of blessedness, or the sense of saying, if you have arranged your life to worship and to fear the Lord, delight in his commands, and to emulate his graciousness, mercy, and righteousness, that then there is a sense in which your future is one that doesn't need to be filled with fear, no matter how it plays out in your immediate context. The New Living Translation of this psalm, especially the first several verses, is particularly colorful. Let me just read this. How joyful are those who fear the Lord and delight in obeying his commands. Their children will be successful everywhere, and an entire generation of godly people will be blessed. They themselves will be wealthy, and their good deeds will last forever. Light shines in darkness for the godly. They are generous, compassionate, and righteous. Good comes to those who lend money generously and conduct their businesses fairly. Such people will not be overcome by evil. Those who are righteous will be long remembered. They do not fear bad news. They confidently trust the Lord to care for them. They are confident and fearless and can face their foes triumphantly. So let me ask you this question. How does fear versus trust show up in your own heart and life? What is your dominant fear as you turn the page from one calendar year to the next? My guess is that whatever it is that you fear the most is the closest thing to a rival God in your life as God himself. And what I think ultimately this psalm is pointing to is that when we make God our God, rather than the good things of our life our God, that then God entrusts us with the good things of our lives. And he lets us experience them because they are not ultimately something that we hold in such high esteem that we have to fear bad news. That phrase, they don't fear bad news. My family had a fair amount of bad news this last year. We did get one of those phone calls that came that said, Dad has had to go to the hospital, and then in the ensuing weeks, each call seemed to be worse until we had to be present when all of the machines were disconnected and his life passed away. We're speaking of my wife's father. And what I'm saying is not that praising the Lord, fearing the Lord, delighting in his ways means that we avoid these things, but it means that we don't have to fear the bad news, because our ultimate hope isn't in one more year with our dad or our husband. It's not in having enough in our 401k. It's not in the global markets. It's not in world peace. We don't fear bad news because we know the one who ultimately is God. And therefore, we can have a timeline that is longer than this life. Do you see the phrase that appears over and over in here? Verse 3, and his righteousness endures forever. Verse 6, for the righteous will never be moved. He will be remembered forever. And then verse 9, he has distributed freely and he's given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. The timeline that is ultimately about our blessedness, that helps us live in blessedness, is the timeline of eternity, not the timeline of the calendar year. Praise the Lord. Fear the Lord, because blessed is the person who fears the Lord and delights in his commands.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.